Welcome to this explainer. All right, today we're diving into something that's, well, pretty sobering, but absolutely crucial to understand. We're unpacking a geopolitical framework from analyst Zhang Shuquin, and he maps out exactly why the world is actually closer to a major, potentially global conflict today than it has been in decades. It's a heavy topic for sure, but getting a grip on the underlying structure of these global events is essential.
I want you to think back to 1962. According to our source, we're actually closer to a Third World War right now than at any point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he emphasizes that this isn't just happening by accident. It's happening because a really complex architecture of conflict is being quietly and methodically assembled, literally piece by piece, right under our noses. Now, if you're keeping up with mainstream public discourse, you'll probably notice a really common theme. We tend to assume the real danger lies in a single flashpoint, right? The thought process is basically, if we can just contain the situation in Ukraine, or manage the tensions over Taiwan, or stabilize the Middle East, then the whole global system is going to stabilize. Well, in this explainer, we're going to challenge that exact assumption. So the crucial point here is this stark contrast in how we view risk. Public fear gets laser-focused on these isolated incidents, but the reality, what Jong calls a structural convergence, is so much more dangerous. We're actually looking at multiple fault lines activating simultaneously, and each one is independently capable of producing a catastrophic war. It's a structural convergence that completely changes how we need to look at global stability. Okay, so here's our roadmap for unpacking all of this. We'll hit 1. The myth of single flashpoints. 2. The US-China structural trap. 3. The nuclear shield lesson. 4. A defiant new axis. 5. The India-Pakistan triggers. And finally, 6. When global firebreaks fail. Let's get right into it. Part 1. The myth of single flashpoints. We've got to break the illusion that our current geopolitical instability is just a series of disconnected, manageable regional problems. The source actually draws this chilling parallel to the year 1914. For the first time since the outbreak of World War I, we have a structurally similar setup. Jong notes that the people living through 1914 also incorrectly assumed the international system was stable. I mean, they genuinely believed that great powers were just too economically interconnected to ever risk a total war. And historically speaking, they were wrong in literally the most consequential way a civilization can be wrong. Which brings us to part 2, the US-China structural trap. This relationship forms the very spine of conflict in this emerging global architecture. To really get what's happening with this spine, we have to talk about the Thucydides trap. This is a concept based on Graham Allison's landmark Harvard study, and it examines the structural pressure that gets created anytime a rapidly rising power threatens to displace an established ruling power. Now, the hard data behind this is honestly staggering. When Allison examined 16 historical cases of this exact dynamic, a rising power meeting a ruling power, he found that 12 of them ended in war. Yep, 12 out of 16. It's a structural pressure that is just exceptionally difficult to manage peacefully. And you can see exactly how that trap is materializing today. Just look at these two non-negotiable structural commitments. On one side, China has this unambiguous, publicly stated commitment to the reunification of Taiwan. And on the flip side, the United States has spent 70 years building a Pacific security architecture that absolutely depends on Taiwan remaining independent from Beijing. These aren't just political postures, They're concrete, structural commitments from two nuclear-armed superpowers. The terrifying reality is that, physically, both commitments simply cannot be honored at the same time. Let's move on to part 3, the nuclear shield lesson. We're going to examine Russia's calculated aggression in Ukraine and the massive strategic lesson it's broadcasting to the rest of the world. The source argues that Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine was a very calculated bet based on his view of post-Cold War security. But the crucial takeaway isn't just about Russia and NATO. It's what happened next. By invading a country without triggering a direct, conventional NATO military response, Russia demonstrated something vital. Nuclear weapons provide a really reliable shield under which you can prosecute conventional aggression. Powers like China, North Korea, and Iran are taking notes, and that lesson, it can't be unlearned. That shared understanding leads us right to part 4, a defiant new axis. This is a deepening strategic alignment that goes largely underreported in its full scope by Western media. What we're looking at here is a highly active, sanctions-busting, resource-sharing network. You've got Russia supplying energy to China, North Korea sending artillery shells to Russia, Iran providing drones, and China supplying dual-use technology. They don't necessarily share an ideology or culture, but they definitely share a common interest. As investor and historian Ray Dalio notes, this is the real-time emergence of a new world order that's actively dismantling the American international system. Within this new axis, the source points out that Iran is catastrophically underestimated by the West. Rather than just viewing them as a Middle Eastern headache, we need to see them as a power that has reached nuclear threshold status, meaning they're right on the brink of being a nuclear-armed state. From Hamas in October 2023 to the Houthis, Hezbollah, and those direct strikes in April 2024, the source argues these are not just isolated flare-ups. No, they're a highly coordinated, multi-front pressure campaign designed to test and ultimately break American security architecture in the region.
Now we turn to Part 5, the India-Pakistan trigger. This is a highly volatile situation on the subcontinent that could rapidly accelerate this entire global convergence.
The source highlights the incredibly tense events of May 2025, where nuclear-armed India and Pakistan exchanged kinetic strikes. We're talking actual missiles and explosive firepower. What this perfectly illustrates is that once missiles fly, the margin for miscalculation completely disappears. Escalation goes from being a policy question to a physics question. The real danger here is that Pakistan is deeply tied to China strategically. So structurally speaking, a conflict between India and Pakistan is essentially a conflict waiting to draw on China. And as we've established today, a conflict involving China does not stay regional.
Finally, Part 6, when global firebreaks fail. We have to look at the big picture of why the safety mechanisms that kept the 20th century relatively intact are currently collapsing all over the globe. The convergence of all these tensions we've just covered creates what strategists call a multi-domain, multi-theater conflict environment. It's a system of interlocking pressures. If things escalate between the US and China over Taiwan, or Russia and NATO, or Iran and Israel, it immediately creates pressure and strategic opportunity in every other theater around the globe, all at the exact same time. To prevent a global fire, you need fire breaks, right? But our traditional fire breaks are failing. The assumption of American hegemonic stability is heavily strained right now. The concept of nuclear deterrence? Well, rather than preventing war, it's actually emboldening aggressive actors to act conventionally because they don't fear an ultimate reprisal. And that great liberal argument of economic interdependence, the fact that Germany was heavily buying Russian gas, did absolutely nothing to stop Russian tanks from crossing the border into Ukraine. This haunting quote from Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Barbara Techman perfectly captures the sheer gravity of our situation. Writing about the origins of World War I, she noted that nations didn't slide into war through mere stupidity. Instead, they marched into it through the rational logic of their own positions and their own commitments. Just as we explored today, it's the interaction of rational structural constraints, not necessarily irrational intentions, that so often produces absolute catastrophe. Which brings us to our final takeaway. As Jang asserts, a third world war is not inevitable. But the structural conditions that make it possible, they're more fully assembled today than at any point in living memory. The pieces are absolutely on the board, and the end game has indeed begun. So the only question left to ask is this: will enough people recognize the structure of this threat and wake up in time to matter? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.